My daughter's fiancé asked about the water rights on our property 4 separate times before I started writing things down. I'm a retired civil engineer. I spent 40 years solving problems by noticing what other people didn't bother to count. And when a question repeats itself, like a knock that never quite stops, I notice. By his 4th visit, I had half a page of notes in the legal pad I keep by the kitchen window. By the morning of his wedding to my daughter, I had filled several more. Standing at the entrance to the tent where the ceremony was about to begin, my daughter took my arm. We were about to walk down the aisle together. 200 guests were seated in neat rows on our land, the same Tennessee hills her mother and I had worked for 3 decades. Her fiancé stood at the far end looking exactly like what he had spent years practicing to look like, steady, trustworthy, the kind of man you'd hand a key to. She pressed something into my jacket pocket. I felt it with 2 fingers, a folded piece of paper. I looked at her, her eyes were dry, but the calm in them was the kind people manage only after they have already cried everything out. "Read it, Dad," she said quietly. 3 words in her handwriting. "Dad, stop it." The string quartet was tuning in the corner. 200 people were waiting. And I was standing there with that note burning through my pocket, holding the arm of the woman I had raised, the only person left in this world I would do anything for. I had a choice: walk her down that aisle and deal with this quietly, or end it in front of everyone. I chose the truth. But to understand why, and to understand why my daughter and I had both been carrying the same secret in silence all the way to that aisle, you have to go back to Thanksgiving. My wife passed on a Tuesday in March, 18 months before all of this, pancreatic cancer. We had 7 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning, and I will not pretend that was enough time, because nothing would have been. She was 61 years old. She had been a high school librarian for 32 years, and she knew the name of every student who had ever walked through her door. She was the kind of woman rooms got quieter around, not because she demanded it, but because people paid attention without knowing why. After she was gone, I rattled around our farmhouse like something left in a cabinet after the kitchen is packed up. Our daughter came home for a month. She works as a large animal veterinarian in Nashville. And it had always felt right that a girl raised on a horse farm would end up caring for horses professionally. After her month was up, she went back. I stayed. The farm is 220 acres. My wife and I bought it in 1991 for what seems like nothing now. We ran quarter horses for most of 3 decades, sold the breeding operation before I retired, but kept the land, the barn, the house, the timber, stands in the back 40. I was comfortable. I had sold my engineering consulting firm to a regional group in 2018. I had income from royalties on 3 infrastructure patents, old truck, same coat for 9 winters, 1 vacation every few years. We had never lived like we had money because Philip, my wife's father, a man who watched 2 brothers stop speaking over an inheritance, had taught her early that the moment people know what you have, they start calculating. So we had never told them. My daughter called the week before Thanksgiving. She said she was bringing someone home. He arrived in a car that was too clean for a man who had driven 3 states and too expensive for someone who did not want you to notice it. He shook my hand on the porch with exactly the right pressure and called me sir the first 3 times he spoke. He complimented the property before he asked a single question about my daughter's childhood. I noticed that, and I told myself I was being ungenerous. Her mother had been gone 8 months. Every protective instinct I had was running high and possibly unreliable. After dinner, we walked out toward the paddock. My daughter went inside to call a friend, and it was just the 2 of us in the November cold, looking across the field at the back tree line. He asked what lay beyond the timber stand. I told him it was undeveloped county land that bordered our eastern fence. He asked about the western edge. I told him the creek marked it. He nodded slowly, like a man adding a column of numbers in his head. Interesting piece of property, he said. Acreage like this close to a growing county, must be worth quite a bit. It's home, I said. He smiled. The question folded itself neatly away, but I had heard it. Over the next 4 months, he came to the farm 7 times. He helped hang fence wire in February. He put up shelving in the barn in March. He was pleasant company, and my daughter was happy in a way she hadn't been in years, and I wanted to protect that happiness. But the questions kept coming. Water rights, timber value, whether I'd ever considered a conservation easement. He knew people in that space, legitimate people, good returns, what it would take to rezone agricultural land in our county. 7 visits, 7 variations of the same question. I am an engineer. I believe in patterns. I called my attorney in April. She had been my wife's attorney first, had handled our estate planning, knew our finances better than most people know their own. I laid out everything, the questions, the timeline, the way his eyes tracked across the barn when he thought I wasn't watching, the way every conversation eventually curved back to value and acreage and what I intended to do with all of it eventually. She was quiet. How long has your daughter known him? 4 months, engaged in February. That's fast. I know, I said. Give me a few days. Don't sign anything. Don't show him documents. Act like nothing's changed. She called back on a Thursday and asked me to come in person. The folder on her desk was thick enough that my stomach dropped before she opened it. He had done this before, twice that she could confirm. A woman in her late 50s in Georgia, widowed, ran a cattle operation, significant land assets. Her daughter had brought home a charming man who kept asking about the property. He was engaged for 5 months. Then, 2 weeks after attending a family financial meeting, he disappeared. The family paid him to go away quietly and sign an NDA. They had chosen silence over scandal, and I understood that choice even as it made me angry. The second case, a woman in her mid-60s in Kentucky, same profile, widowed, farmland, a daughter who had vouched for him. 6 months, then gone after another financial meeting, another payment, another NDA. He targets families like yours, my attorney said. Modest lifestyle. Assets that don't advertise themselves. A daughter who has lost one parent and is close to the other. She slid a business card across the desk. I want you to call this man. The investigator she recommended arrived in a vehicle so unremarkable, I forgot what color it was the moment it pulled away. He was mid-50s, former federal, and he moved through my house the way I move through a new building, reading load-bearing walls, looking for where the structure is and where it only appears to be. He installed cameras in 3 places: kitchen, living room, front entry. Within 20 minutes, they were invisible to me, and I had watched him place everyone. He called 10 days later and asked me to come to his office. He spread the documents across the table and let me read before he spoke. My daughter's fiancé's name was not what he had told us. His real name was Craig Dunbar. He had a warrant outstanding in Texas for wire fraud. He had filed a legal name change in 2021, 2 years after the warrant. There was a photograph from 2019, a mugshot. Younger, harder around the eyes, but unmistakably the man who had shaken my hand on the porch and called me sirs. There's more, the investigator said. I want you to be prepared. His father had been an engineer, small operation, regional work, adequate for a while. In 2007, his firm competed on a county water infrastructure contract, about $8 million. My company was one of 4 bidders. We won it on technical merit and price. It was a fair competition. His father's firm had underbid their capabilities and submitted incomplete specifications, and the county awarded it to us. 18 months later, his father's company filed for bankruptcy. Craig was 16 when the company went under, the investigator said. His father died in 2009. He was 19. He handed me a photocopy of a letter, his father's handwriting. I will not reproduce what it said, but my name was in it. I sat with that for a long time. I had not destroyed that man. I had competed for a contract and won it fairly. That is how the business works. But a 16-year-old boy watching his father come apart doesn't understand the business, and the grief of that boy had curdled into something cold and patient over 14 years. Craig Dunbar had not come for my land because he needed money. He had come because he had decided I owed a debt, and he intended to collect it through my daughter. The investigator read my silence correctly. His father's pain was real, he said. What Craig did with it is something else entirely. I nodded. That was the line I needed to hold on to. Because later, when I felt the pull of something like pity, I went back to the image of Craig Dunbar standing at my kitchen counter, and the pity went away cleanly. My doctor called on a Tuesday evening. Doctors do not call in the evenings without reason, and I knew it before she said a word. He had come to her office in April, she told me. He had introduced himself as a concerned future family member and asked questions, specific questions. What are the early signs of cognitive decline in men over 60? What is the legal process for establishing that someone cannot manage their own affairs? What medications can impair judgment, and how long do they stay in the system? He had asked about sedatives, dosages, detectability. Those are not the questions of a worried son-in-law, she said. Those are the questions of someone building a case. I thought about every cup of coffee he had offered to pour, every time he had insisted on helping in the kitchen. The glass of water he had brought me after dinner last March, already filled, already handed to me before I had asked for anything. If you appear confused and unreliable on multiple occasions, especially documented on video, my doctor said, he can petition for guardianship. It is a real legal mechanism, and it has been abused before. My mother was a victim of exactly this. It is why I called you tonight. We put together a plan. My attorney, the investigator, my doctor, and the county sheriff, who turned out to be the kind of man who had spent 22 years watching things like this happen and had long since decided he was finished just watching. The trap was straightforward. I invited Craig to dinner alone. I told him I had been thinking about estate planning and wanted his input. I cooked, we ate, and when the conversation curved toward finances, as it always did, I pressed my hand to my temple and said I had a headache coming on. I stepped away to lie down for a few minutes, I told him, and I left a glass of water on the kitchen counter. The cameras had been upgraded that week, 4 angles, crystal audio. I stood at the top of the stairs with the investigator's tablet and watched the feed in real time. Craig waited 8 seconds after I left the room. Then he stood, walked to the base of the stairs, and listened to confirm I was gone. He went back to the kitchen, took a small prescription bottle from his jacket pocket, tapped 1 pill onto the countertop, and crushed it with the back of a spoon. Not the spoon from dinner, a clean one from the back of the drawer. He poured the powder into my glass. He stirred it. He wiped the spoon with a paper towel, put it in the sink, returned the bottle to his pocket, and was back at the table before a minute had passed. When I came downstairs, I walked to the counter and picked up the glass. He stood immediately. "Here, let me," he said, and he brought it to me himself, smiling. "Drink that. Hydration helps with headaches." My phone rang, timed to the second, the way we had planned it. I turned away from him, and with my back to the room, I set the glass on the counter near the dish rack, where my attorney had placed a sealed evidence container that morning. I poured the water slowly, preserving the glass, and turned back. The sample went to the lab that night. 25 milligrams of a sedative compound, enough in a man my age to produce documented confusion, coordination loss, memory gaps. More than enough for a predator to film and weaponize. We had him on 4 cameras. The sheriff was ready. My attorney had subpoenas and affidavits. Both prior victims had agreed to testify, now that there was hard evidence they had never had before. All we needed was the right moment. The wedding was 3 weeks away. The ceremony was on a Saturday in June, on our property, under a white tent my wife had always said she wanted to use for exactly this kind of day. 214 guests. My daughter's college friends, her colleagues from the practice, cousins who had driven in from 3 states, people who loved her. I woke before light and sat on the porch where my wife used to have her coffee. The horses were still in the pasture. The hills were doing what they do at dawn in Tennessee, going pale blue before the sun burns them gold. I thought about her. I thought about what she would have seen in Craig Dunbar from the first handshake, and I thought about how much better this would have gone if she had been here to say it plainly. Then I stopped, because that kind of thinking does not help anyone. My daughter knocked on the porch door at 7 in the morning, still in her robe. She sat in the chair beside me, and we were quiet together, the way she had learned to be quiet from her mother. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something about him." She had gone to his rental house 3 weeks earlier to surprise him. The door was unlocked. She had heard him on the phone in the back room and had stood in the hallway without meaning to, and then with every intention. She described what she had heard, timelines, a document someone was preparing, a name that was not his, and then his voice, easy and certain. "The old man is too proud to think anyone's ahead of him. That's the easiest kind." She had not slept that night. She had spent 2 weeks trying to find an explanation that made those words mean something else. She had not found one. "I didn't tell you," she said, "because I didn't want to break your heart if I was wrong." "I didn't tell you," I said, "for exactly the same reason." We looked at each other in the morning quiet. I told her we were going to that wedding. She slipped the note into my pocket just before we walked down the aisle. I had not asked her to. She had decided on her own that if there was a moment I needed to know she was standing beside me, that was it. The music began. We walked. He was at the altar looking like every version of himself he had ever rehearsed. His associate, confirmed by my investigator as the man from the Texas fraud case, traveling under his own assumed name, stood beside him as best man. We reached the altar. I gave my daughter forward. The officiant moved through the words. I sat in the front row and watched Craig Dunbar watch my daughter, and I thought about the 16-year-old boy he had been, and the 14 years of planning that boy had grown into, and I let the thought go. When the moment came, if anyone knows of any lawful reason these two should not be joined, I stood up. The tent went quiet in the way a room does when 200 people stop breathing at once. He looked at me. For just a fraction of a second, the warmth went out of his face entirely. Then it came back, the smile, the concerned tilt of the head, the voice warm with practiced patience. My daughter spoke before he could. She turned from the altar to face the guests. Her voice shook in the first sentence and was steady after that. She told them about the phone call. She described what she had heard. The timelines, the document, his laughter about the old man, who was too proud to see it coming. He started to say she was confused, that grief distorts things, that they could talk about this privately. Please, everyone. My attorney stood up from the third row. She named him, his real name. Out loud, in front of 200 people. She named the warrant in Texas. She named the 2 women before my daughter, the payments their families had made to buy his silence, the NDAs they had signed because no other option had seemed survivable. She named what he had put in my drink, what he had researched at my doctor's office, what 4 cameras had recorded in high definition. She played the footage on a tablet passed row to row. 200 people watched Craig Dunbar crush a pill and stir it into my water and smile when he handed it to me. The sheriff stepped out of the 4th row. He had been there all morning in a suit that did not fit quite like anyone else's. Craig Dunbar said nothing when the handcuffs were put on. He had not prepared for this. His associate made it 8 steps down the aisle before the second deputy caught him. They were both in the back of a patrol car before the caterers had finished refilling the water pitchers. My daughter and I sat on the porch that evening, where I had sat with her mother in the mornings. The tent was still standing in the field. A few of her closest friends had stayed inside, and the sounds of them moving gently around the kitchen were exactly the right kind of company. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I almost went through with it," she said, even after the phone call. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if I destroy everything and I'm wrong? "That's not weakness," I said. "That's what love does. It makes you want to be wrong." The hills were dark now, the kind of dark that happens only where there are no streetlights. A barn owl called from somewhere in the timber stand. "He wanted the land," she said. "The land, the patents, everything your mother and I built." I paused. "And something harder to put a price on. His father blamed me for losing a contract 30 years ago. He lost it fairly, but the loss destroyed him. And his son watched that happen at 16 years old. And somewhere in that grief, he decided I owed a debt." She was quiet. "Suffering doesn't make it right," she said. "No," I said, "it doesn't." 4 months later, Craig Dunbar received a federal sentence of 7 years. His associate received 4. The 2 women from Georgia and Kentucky both testified, and I watched their statements on a screen in my attorney's office and thought about what it had cost them just to walk through that door. I was grateful they did. Their courage was part of what put him away, and they deserved to know it mattered. My daughter went back to Nashville in July. She is careful now in the way people are. After they learn something, they cannot unlearn. But she is not closed. She called me in October to talk about dinner she had gone on with a colleague from a neighboring practice. We talked for almost an hour. She laughed twice. That was enough to tell me she was going to be all right. I still sit on this porch in the mornings. The hills still go blue before gold. The horses are still in the pasture. The land still runs 220 acres to the fences, my wife. And I drove into Tennessee clay ourselves, post by post, the summer our daughter was 3 years old. What I know now that I wish I had trusted from the beginning is this. The instinct that tells you something is wrong is not paranoia. It is not grief distorting your judgment. It is every year of your life compressed into a single quiet alarm. I spent 40 years as an engineer trusting data over instinct. I should have trusted both from the start. Trust what you know, and trust the people who love you enough to slip a note into your pocket on the hardest morning of their lives.